The night the river decided to return what it had kept. The fog wrapped Hoboken in a hush so padded you could hear the city breathe through cloth. Horns mourned somewhere off the piers. Chains clicked like teeth. Ropes drew their whispers along wet planks in patient arcs. The ferry from Manhattan came in skewed, as if nudged by a thought it regretted, its lanterns stuttering on black water that drank light and kept its taste. A newsboy, too young for the hour hawked headlines that did not yet exist. A woman carried a pot of soup under a folded towel, as if warmth were contraband. The crowd moved the way cold and hunger teach you to move close as coins. Faces turned to keep what little heat a cheek can loan a cheek. And then a child stepped down from the ferry, barefoot, a simple wrongness anyone could name without losing sleep. The boards were ribbed with salt and cold as unpaid promises, yet her feet made no sound, no smear of water, as if the night itself had set her down, the way a careful mother sets a glass on a cloth. A retired longshoreman named Coogan stiffened as if a rope had tightened across his chest. His hands had broken 100 crates. A white scar stapled his eyebrow like a kept receipt. "Eva," he said, and the fog held the name without echo, trying it on like a coat it wasn't sure it could afford. The policeman at the gangway lifted his lantern because procedure, when done honestly, is a kind of courage. Light lay on her face like a coin, the comma birthmark above the left brow punctuating a sentence. Hoboken had stopped reading in 1894. Dress plain, ribbon honest, hair the color of a photograph kept in a drawer for fear it might learn the street. She did not look frightened. She did not look calm. She looked like someone who knew exactly where she was supposed to stand and had been standing there a long time. She looked past the lantern and the men and the woman guarding her soup. She looked for the terminal clock. Through the glass doors she found it and tilted her head as if to catch a bell no one else could hear. If you were the sort who writes things down for a living and cannot stop uso, a thing you will doubt forever. In the reflection, her face learned 30 years in a breath. The mouth found winter, the hair a surrendered sheen, the eyes collected a little hunger, and then the glass fogged from within, and the girl was a girl again. No one screamed. Hoboken saves, screaming for fire, and for the river. Voices gathered instead, lanterns drifting toward and around her, so the crowd made a living mizallies of coats and hats, a child crawling where a door would be. I saw the spiral before anyone else. A fresh labyrinth painted in silver on a mooring no bigger than a palm, still wet enough to take a fingerprint. I set my leather notebook on it without seeming to notice. Some symbols should not meet the wrong eyes first. The policeman asked her name because the body blesses old rituals. "Eva Malloy," she said, syllables clean as laundry, and you could feel 30 winters fold themselves away. She asked for the red thread map, as though for a package reserved in her absence. Coogan whispered Malloy again, and the whisper got caught in the ropework of the pier and carried along the boards until it turned into proof that breath happens even when you are not ready for it. By morning the papers strutted like men in new coats. Miracle on the Hudson. Girl returns, untouched by time. The joke sheet made weather of it because jokes are how a city buys time to be afraid later. I stood across from the claims office and studied the missing child poster that had outlived paste and rain and indifference. The paper should have cracked and foxed and learned humility. Instead, it looked as if it had slept in a drawer. Even the serif letters, promising rewards, still believed themselves. When I put a finger to the comma birthmark in the photograph, I felt where other fingers had polished prayer. Detective Rocco Sarto arrived the way finished facts arrive. He had worked the Malloy case as a rookie in 1894 and had been paying interest ever since. His hat brim had the patience of men who know results do not always sign their names. "You saw her," he said. "At the slips?" I said. "What did she ask for?" "The red thread map." He nodded like a man who had hoped for a different answer and brought the wrong pair of gloves. Dr. Agnes Wren watched from a doorway, light cutting her profile clean. "She believes the body is too proud to be fooled for long. She believes the mind can act a miracle for a while, and then forget its lines. She is a physician the way a straight razor is an accessory." I told her what I had seen in the clock glass and about the fresh silver spiral. She did not say, impossible. She said, practiced. In a city of staged accidents and honest lies for money, practice will take a piece out of you you didn't know you favored. We met the child in a room that used to hold carnival banners. Agnes examined her hand's unbeaten nails. Half Moon's palest talk you keep to yourself. Pulse steady. Pupils respectful. Language edged in older shapes the way a good coat goes out of fashion without becoming a joke. Asked the debt, and she offered one from the year she vanished. Corrected herself. Punished herself with a small look for having spoiled a dress. She did not know a war had come and gone like a very wide storm. She knew how many steps to the attic, and which board squeaked fifth. When Agnes asked what the red thread map was, Eva traced a path in the air the way a child learns to approach a sleeping father. Along the rail, past the nail at shoulder height, a step to the right to avoid the creek. Eva Malloy came in with his hat and his guilt. Hoboken does not judge men like him. The river judges enough. He did not touch his daughter. He looked at the smoothness of her skin and took a breath that didn't find all the rooms. He told us about a length of red string tied to a nail near the stairs when everything was alive. A game for children that made a home into geography. One morning it was gone. He blamed the cat. He can no longer remember the cat's name. That forgetting hurt him, as if it were the only honest thing left. Toward evening, we walked the slips, collars up, fog-drawing lanes between lamps. On a crate, someone had chalked a small labyrinth. Careful lines, a dotted center. As I watched, 2 slow fingers moved to erase it. The man attached to the hand kept his cap low and his face like a shut gate. When I said his name, the fog swallowed it. He lifted his hand so I could see the Haferestmas, or a warning hand, went into a whiteness that had made up its mind. Sarto arrived on the echo of my steps. We agreed to call it nothing, so we would know what to look for later. Back at my desk, I opened my ledger to shore facts against tide, and found a rhythm instead of numbers. The same cargo build 4 times, exactly 30 days apart. A mistake if made by fools. A code if made by men who keep order to misuse it. I copied the dates and carried them to Agnes, and under a lamp that cut the paper like snow, she set those dates against recorded foghorn blasts from the night. Eva vanished, and the previous, and the last. Her pencil found a path. Not a straight run, not a circle. A maze. Exits mapped to ferries, turns mapped to chimes. If you walked from Pier 3 to the bronze post with silver rivets, cut through the warehouse under the crimson hazard flag, mounted the catwalk above the refinery pipes, and aligned your stride by the terminal clock's reflection knot, the clock itself you made the first turn. What waited at the second was the kind of answer a city refuses during business hours. Before we step deeper into the fog, tell us in the comments where you're listening from, your city and your country, so the next case can learn your streets by heart. The policeman's trick is repetition. Sarto brought Eva to the terminal at noon. She pressed her palm to the glass, and the fog inside cleared in a thumbprint shape. He listened here, she said, and meant the clock, and somehow also the space behind it. She remembered a waltz, the night she left 3 counts. A pause. 3 counts a longer pause. If time could be convinced to dance by politeness and practice, the man with silver eyes watched from a hollow in the wall, she said. And you knew he had always been a foreman, even if no ledger ever wrote his name that way. We followed a map that wasn't a map because work is stubborn. The circle of spiritualists that called itself a society met once beneath a Jersey City tailor shop, in rooms that smelled of chalk and camphor and men who spend good money on certainty. Their ledgers kept dates and tides and horn calls in a schoolmaster's hand that makes nonsense look legitimate. Someone had cut the bottoms off a dozen pages with a knife so clean it felt like a decision. There were crate counts where there should have been prayers, and premiums where there should have been blessings. If hope is a business model, those men prospered until they ran out of hours. Behind a row of suits, sick with damp, we found a corridor walled as suggestion rather than commandment. A bronze plate set into brick by 4 studs. The labyrinth again. Lines shallow as breath. The metal was warm in the cold room, as if a hand had flattened itself there a moment before. Agnes listened with her ear against the plate, the way a doctor listens for a lie in a lung. From beyond came the last 3 steps of a waltz, then nothing. Architectural deceit, she said, and the word put frost in the air. Outside, catwalks through a second waterfront into the sky. Men in goggles walked above a city that walked below. Mirrors hung at angles along a service route so a watcher at a single point could keep 2 doors and 3 corridors in the pocket of his sight. Stand in the wrong place, and you could see your own back. Eva moved like a girl, guided by the hand of a game she had once won without knowing why. She took a wrong reflection and went through it. We ran the corresponding corridor and found her already there, dry as chalk, unafraid of receiving us. In a tight tunnel under the pier, we pried open a locker, sealed with tar and stamped with the silver labyrinth. Inside lay a child's dress preserved with twin to the one in the old photograph's, same stern seamstress, same apology offered to ornament, a tag in a clerk's careful hand. Return when cloth agrees. Eva touched the ribbon with the fearlessness children share with the very old. The light had to work around her fingers. The foreman with the silver goggles watched us. Watch ourselves! He stood where steam made a veil. When immobile, the veil moved, so his outline behaved like someone else. Essaye dia of him. He walked into a corner you wouldn't choose, and vanished into a run of pipe no man could fit. Sarto posted men at exits that weren't exits. Steam sang polite songs in 3 notes. The city smiled, because the city keeps its teeth clean. Mr. DeVries had built a reputation by renaming crimes, errors, and accidents compliance. He invited us to his office to be reassured. His eyes were not silver. They were middle gray and declined to volunteer. He chaired a committee devoted to making peers less murderous, a wholesome way to keep murders on good terms. His ledger showed dates that looped like a man practicing his signature. Auditors, he said. Order. Agnes tasted the word and set it back on the plate. That night, a controlled blast sealed emergency exits along a maintenance maze near Pier 2, and for an hour the dark wore a crown of crimson spokes. Pipes knocked like polite knuckles unlocked doors. The goggled foreman, Southan Linear, pushed his eyewear up for breath and revealed irises pale as a winter sky before snow, the color that refuses to be a color. He smiled as a formality and went down a vertical run. We escaped the trick by stealing from our own stolen map. 3 ticks in a step, a line by reflections, not objects. Trust the horn that isn't aimed at you. The corridor spat us into open air as if it had been waiting to be rid of us. Eva saved her sharpest memory for when we were almost done with a place. The bronze door with no building. You must have the tide right, she said, as if reciting a lesson she had given herself. You must stand where the clock is only glass. You must carry the thread. Seamus closed his eyes, because sight can be too expensive. We went to the old pilings at an hour that had learned to count in 3s. The bronze door stood where there should have been air and rumor only. 4 studs. Shallow labyrinth. A handle polished by hands that did not belong to this year. Inside was a short hall and a turn. The turn opened on a short hall and a turn. Agnes marked the wall with a nub of silver chalk, and we found her mark ahead of us, at the next corner, and the next, a neat insult to straight lines. The walls kept our footsteps the way a collector keeps stamps. No sorcery, said Agnes's eyes. Human craft, said the tremor at her jaw. In the pipes, the waltz kept time. Tick, 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 puss, tick, 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 longer puss. The trick was not the door or the turns, but the timetable. Sound told us where we had been. A map stitched into metal told us where we thought we were. The right exit might be a year rather than a street. That does not sit well in a claims report. You learn it in your knees. Sarto came with a ledger. No one would admit to restoring. The society brokered insurance frauds and Sunday clothes. Shipments claimed lost at sea took second routes through mirrors and timetables and reappeared on dates profitable to guide men with committees. Children were taught the geometry. Children are good at rhythm. They obey rules that praise quiet. Train a mind to count chimes, and you can make it forget weather. Train a city to clap for miracles, and you can walk barrels under hospital windows at noon. To free Eva from a map that had learned her better than she had learned herself, I did the kindest brutal thing I have done at a pier. She asked again for the red thread map, as if asking for a coat. I set it on fire, where the hallway made its lie. Not yarn, memory, pattern, the ledger that forced dates to behave like corridors. Agnes's chalk, flame found air, the way a rumor finds a lonely ear. The hallway hiccuped out of its waltz, offended. The labyrinth does not enjoy correction. It shoved us into the only exit left when we took away its options. We came out into now the way a city coughs up a bone it cannot swallow. Morning put frost on ropes and humility on faces. Eva sat on a bench in the terminal where the sun pretends friendship. She watched the clock as if it owed her an apology. Seamus stood with a new line by his mouth, a single grey hair finding its purpose. On her face, if you were rude enough to look closely, a fine line at the corner of one eye, the smallest surrender. The 30-year bargain had been amended by something as small and large as a breath you can finally see. The ledger that would have made a judge listen vanished while the clerk ate lunch. Sartos shrugged like a man who knows the city's bone-deep lesson. Wheels within wheels. De Vries sent a letter congratulating perseverance and promising funds for railings. Agnes pocketed the nub of silver chalk and drew a maze on the corner of my notebook the size of a thumbnail. "To remember what a straight line is not," she said. That evening I walked the slips with the aftertaste of metal on my tongue. Men said goodnight by nodding the way you nod to make outliving mistakes possible. In the terminal glass, the clock worked without wanting my opinion. For a breath only there was a crowd of the same girl walking into different nights. A trick of light. Ah, warning! A record. Some doors are both entrance and exit. Some years are rooms you can get locked in if you count wrong. Some maps are drawn by men who count money better than blessings. If this story kept you company in the fog, subscribe for more dark and mysterious Tilly's Und. Don't forget to watch the other cases waiting for you on the channel. Night returned with the confidence of a habit, and with it came the people who are most themselves after lamps are lit. The docks have two shifts. The one the city pays for, and the one the city pretends not to notice. Between them lies a neighborhood of shadows that rents itself by the hour to whatever story needs a place to sit. I made a tour of the men who owed me small truths. You learn to keep your debts thin and your ledger honest enough that its lies don't lean. At the Neptune Tavern, where the beer is colder than the welcome, and the back room once kept a piano as an alibi, I found old Kirsch polishing glass the way penitent men polish memory. He ferried piano crates during the year that no piano ever arrived intact. He had seen Eva in 1894. He remembered the way her mother stood at the edge of the pier chewing a glove until there was more glove in her than on her. She walked like she knew where the boards remembered, he said. Some spots are older than others. You step there, you hear it. He tapped the bar. Someone keeps time. We walked to the Museum of Dull Miracles, that is, the Municipal Archive. The clerk with the onion sandwich remembered my face as if it owed him money. The 1894 file had once been thick. Now it was slim enough to fit in a pocket. It shouldn't fit in. The official photographs were missing their negatives. The logbook recorded a fire in 1905 that destroyed a section of shelves. The burn pattern had been careful. Flames don't learn manners. Men do! Agnes stood at the ash line and traced with her finger a path a flame would not have taken on its own. Guided, she said. An Alson with a ruler. There was one photograph the fire had spared by accident or intention. A street view of the terminal, with a clock glass shining like an eye that refuses to shut. A child in the foreground caught mid-step. A blur where motion makes mockery of permanence. I breathed on the Prinda. Condensation saw what I wanted it to see. In the fog that formed and fled, I could almost swear the labyrinth lived in the reflection lines upon lines. The faintest architecture of a trick. The Malloy house sat in a salt-licked row where windows learned to be small. On the stairpost there was a shadow the size of a child's fist, where red string had once worn, varnished down to honest wood. Seamus's hands trembled as he made tea. On the wall hung a photograph of a carnival Ferris wheel in better days. She wanted to see the river from a circle, he said. Said circles kept you safe because you could get off where you got on. He laughed at the logic, then swallowed the laugh before it learned to be cruel. Agnes asked to see Eva's room. It held the humility of spaces that have waited too long, folded dresses with air in their sleeves, a cracked porcelain dog, a book of moral tales with a spine that squeaked. Beneath the bed, tucked against the baseboard, a paper coin no bigger than a thumb. Primera slid out a ferry token, not minted official, but clever enough to fool a distracted collector. On its face, the labyrinth. On its back a date, April 7th, 1894. The Night of Three Horns, Eva said from the doorway, with no announcement at all. We had not heard her come up the stairs. She held the banister with ceremony, as if each step had an oath to take. Rocco Sarto had a trick for making silence answer. He put people in it and waited. On the pier where the fog breaks different, because the tide breaks different, he lit a cigarette he did not smoke and asked the river a question. The man with the eraser fingers stepped from behind a stack of drying nets. He said he was named Greeley and that no one had any business chalking games where men had to work. He had a scar along the lip, like a hyphen between words he didn't say. "You erased mazes," Sarto said. "You have a union card for that?" The man shrugged. "I keep the place clean." He looked past us at Eva, without looking at her, the way some men look at photographs of themselves as boys and forgive nothing. We watched him set a bucket down beside a bollard and take from it a rag that had once been a shirt. He wiped at the silver spiral my notebook had covered the night before. The paint had dried into the iron, like a stubborn idea. He scraped with a blade that had never been sharp enough to shave. When he was done, the spiral was still there, as if iron remembers better than rags. "Who draws them?" I asked. He shook his head. "Same fool who likes to count. Same fool who likes to listen." He tapped the clock through the glass with a finger that had learned to be a hammer. "You want to find him? Get lost first." He walked into fog that accepted him like a paid bill. A child should not know the smell of the refinery at night, but Eva did. She could tell the difference between the sweetness that means danger and the sour that means nothing more than men will be coughing in the morning. On the catwalks, she moved as if the boards remembered her feet and wished to please them. Mirrors winked from Angel's eyes that belonged to a watchman with too little pay for the risk he took. Agnes carefully smeared one with the heel of her hand. The world doubled less. We found a panel that opened not to a room but to an idea of a room half built, half imagined, carpentered to mislead. On the far wall, a shape had been drawn and erased and redrawn until the wood learned it. The labyrinth in carpenter's pencil, quarter scale, lines corrected by a mind that believed accuracy could outrun guilt. We stood in that room of practice, and I thought about children's feet counting without knowing they were counting. The tick of a drip became a metronome. The horn became a cue. The glass became a mouth that whispered, "Go now." If a girl followed the pattern the men had le diff, she obeyed the rule to be quiet and clever and small. You could carry her along corridors honest men didn't use, and when the day turned as scheduled you could bring her out somewhere a ledger preferred. If you teach a city to applaud miracles, you may move contraband under its windows in daylight. We started keeping new hours. Dusk was a hallway. Midnight was a room with two doors that insisted on being the same door. Dawn was a mirror with its own opinions. On the third night, we found a watcher in a booth that pretended to be about valves. He wore the silver goggles and kept his hands in his coat because men like that don't like their fingers to be caught learning. He listened to the pipes, the way other men listened at walls. "You can hear the date," he said. "Not to us, but to the metal." Then he blinked, and the goggles caught lantern light and made it cruel. And he was gone down a stair that would have taken me 2 steps to break my neck. Rocco posted men at exits that were not exits, because we had finally learned that the map wants to embarrass you. Agnes wrote numbers on her cuffing pencil that left no shine. She did not sleep much. Eva slept as children do when they have learned to trust a ceiling. Once, near morning, I heard her whisper a piece of a song. It had only 3 notes. It was the right 3. Mr. de Vries summoned us again, this time with the air of a man who has decided generosity will cost him less than precision. He spoke about safety the way the river speaks about drowning politely, as if the matter was someone else's business. He had a way of standing that made the room think he was taller than he was. Agnes watched his hands. The nails were clean, but not new clean, the clean of a man who washes after counting. On his desk lay a ledger where dates repeated with month intervals, as obedient as drilled soldiers. I asked about the 4 shipments billed for the same cargo at 30-day steps. He said the paperwork had lagged. "Paperwork doesn't march," I said. "It limps." He smiled, without showing teeth. "So you do understand." That evening, a whistle pattern I had not yet heard called from across the Hudson. 3 low, 1 long, 2 quick. The refinery answered with a hiss, the way a cat answers a stranger. We ran a route that had not been on any map, and arrived at a pier mouth where the bronze posts wore new polish like a bruise. The man with silver goggles leaned where a shadow learned to hold shape. He tossed something to me. A coin, not a coin, thin as Elias stamped with the labyrinth. On the reverse was no date, just the word return. "When clock agrees," he said, and the steam hid the rest of his mouth. The city made its move with a blast that disguised itself as maintenance and a fire that claimed to have arrived by accident. We were shepherded down a corridor that grew longer because fear stretches boards the way heat stretches rails. The mirrors kept offering exits that were only versions of ourselves. Smoke made orderly thoughts walk in circles. Eva held my sleeve and counted with her lips, 3 and 3 and pause, and we found the one door that had not learned to lie. When we came out, the night had put on crimson spokes again, and Rocco swore a promise into the dark that smelled expensive. We decided the bronze door would have to tell us its secret on our time, not the maps. We charted the tide, not because we trusted the river to keep appointments, but because the river likes to be flattered. At the hour that counts in threes, we returned to the pilings. The door stood where rumor had built it. Inside, the short hall. The turn. The short hall. The turm. Agnes marked the wall. The mark ran ahead to greet us, as before. But this time, we listened with our shoes. One plank complained a little higher than the rest. The air held its cold differently to the left than to the right. Eva said the pause between the third set of ticks is not one pause. It is 2 small pauses kissing. We waited for the second kiss, waiterned 10. The hallway tried to be angry. We let it. There are truths you do not want. The hallway was not simply a joke of angles and sound. It was also a schedule. Each exit corresponded to a day the city remembered. If you chose the wrong ending, you arrived in a year that had already been spoken for. The men who ran barrels through these passages had learned to walk into the right date. They had learned to make a child do it. They had learned to make a city applaud. We had brought with us the things that make cowards of maps: fire and refusal. Eva wanted her red thread map, as one wants a coat in winter. I gave her, instead, a match. Agnes tore out the ledger leaves that had survived too many careful hands, and I held my notebook to a flame I regretted because it had become a better witness than I am. Fire took the paper with a relief that embarrassed us. The chalk marks flared and ran. The bronze darkened as if remembering something it had been told to forget. The waltz in the pipes stumbled. The door shrugged and let us out, not where we had entered, not where we wished, but in a now that admitted it had been cheated. Morning again. Frost again. The ordinary holiness of men carrying coffee in tin cups to places they would pretend not to hate. Eva sat on a bench under a sun that had just learned its job. She watched the clock, because habits do not die when you correct a hallway. Seamus stood near with a new line beside his mouth that made him look like a man who has forgiven more than he advertised. On her face, if you dared look, a fine line by one eye that had not been there. Time had found a way to touch her without bruising. The ledger that could have put handcuffs on careful wrists disappeared while its guardian discussed sandwiches. De Vries sent a note that read, like an alibi given to a friend. Rocco arranged for a valve to go missing along a route someone loved, and for a day the city forgot to smile at itself. Agnes put the nub of silver chalk in my hand and closed my fingers around it. "Remember what a straight line is not," she said. "I walked the slips at dusk. The hour when the city admits it is both the city it shows and the city it hides. In the terminal glass, the clock did its work. For a breath, just when I saw a dozen versions of the same girl walk into different nights, heads at the same tilt, a small smile practiced or learned, or neither. A trick, a warning, a record. Some doors are both entrance and exit. Some years are rooms. Some maps are drawn by men who count money better than blessings. If this story kept you company in the fog, subscribe for more dark and mysterious tales, and don't forget to watch the other cases waiting for you on the channel.